She had never been to a party like this before. The moment she stepped out of the sleek black car, the sight of the building made her heart skip. It was tall and glimmered in the evening light, its windows reflecting the city like shards of glass. The valet took her coat, and she stepped into a lobby that smelled of fresh flowers and expensive perfume. Her shoes clicked softly against the marble floor as she followed the crowd. Inside, the music hit her before she even saw the room. It was soft but commanding, the kind of background music that seemed to remind everyone present that they were important. People were laughing, shaking hands, and holding sparkling glasses of champagne. Everywhere she looked, there were suits and dresses that cost more than she had ever spent on her own wardrobe. For a moment, she felt like she didn't belong. She clutched her small clutch bag a little tighter and tried to straighten her back. She had been invited to this party only because her manager insisted. It's good for networking, they had said. It's a chance to be noticed. But now, standing in the center of the grand ballroom, she wondered if anyone would notice her for anything other than being awkward. The crowd seemed to move in circles, laughing in tight clusters. She tried to slip through politely, nodding and smiling at the occasional familiar face. Some nodded back, others barely glanced. The walls were decorated with golden frames, each holding abstract art that made her tilt her head in curiosity. She took a small sip of sparkling water, hoping it would calm the flutter in her chest, and then she heard a laugh, soft but sharp, coming from a group nearby. She turned slightly and caught the sight of a few people, the kind whose confidence seemed effortless, smiling in a way that made her stomach twist. "Look at her," one said, voice low but just loud enough. "She looks like she's about to faint." She felt her cheeks heat up. She forced a smile, hoping they weren't looking at her, and tried to focus on the music, the people, anything else. But it seemed impossible. Every step she took, she could feel the weight of their eyes even if they weren't on her directly. She told herself she shouldn't care. She had come here for herself, for opportunity, not to be liked. She moved toward the corner of the room, thinking maybe a quieter spot would help her gather her thoughts. Near a table with delicate hors d'oeuvres, she finally allowed herself to exhale. The smell of fresh bread and tiny meat skewers was comforting, almost normal compared to the polished perfection of the rest of the room. She picked up a small canapé, pretending to examine it while sneaking a glance around. Her eyes fell on another guest across the room. He seemed older, confident, with an air that made people naturally look at him. She assumed he was important, perhaps even the host. He didn't seem to notice the mocking laughter or the whispers that made her feel smaller. He moved through the crowd with a calm presence, shaking hands and sharing quiet smiles. Watching him, she felt a mixture of awe and fear. How could anyone carry themselves with such ease in a room full of so much judgment? As she nibbled on her snack, she tried to remember why she was here. She thought of her goals, of the late nights spent preparing reports, of every extra effort she had made to stand out at work. This was supposed to be a chance, a moment where her hard work might finally be recognized. But standing here, surrounded by laughter at her expense, she wondered if anyone would ever see her for who she truly was. The mocking voices returned, closer this time. A group had moved nearby, their whispers sharp like tiny knives. She could hear the words even if she didn't want to. "She doesn't even look like she belongs here," another added. "Does she even know how to have fun at a party?" The laughter that followed was subtle, but it was enough to make her stomach churn. She tried to shrink into herself, wishing the floor would open and swallow her whole. Her hands felt clammy, her legs weak. She wanted to leave, to run back to the safety of her apartment, where nobody would ever make her feel small. But she also knew that leaving would feel like admitting defeat. And she had never been one to give up so easily. She wandered aimlessly for a moment, letting her eyes drift over the lavish decorations, the shimmering dresses, the perfectly polished shoes. Everyone seemed to glide through the night without a care, laughing easily, talking confidently. She wondered how many of them had been in her shoes once, nervous and unsure. Did they remember the feeling of being out of place? She found a small bench near the edge of the room and sat down, clutching her bag on her lap. Her chest rose and fell rapidly as she tried to calm herself. She focused on the music, letting it wash over her, imagining herself in a different place where she was confident and capable. In that moment, she realized how desperately she wanted to be seen, not just noticed, but truly seen for who she was. She didn't notice at first that someone had approached. A voice, calm and kind, asked her if she was enjoying the evening. She looked up and saw the man she had noticed earlier, the one moving through the crowd with quiet authority. There was no judgment in his eyes, no whispering laughter, just a simple, human curiosity. I'm okay, she said, her voice a little shaky. It's just a lot, he nodded, understanding. I know it can be overwhelming. Many people feel the same at first. His smile was gentle, and for the first time since she arrived, she felt a flicker of relief. She wasn't invisible here, and more importantly, she wasn't being judged by everyone around her. She took a deep breath and realized something else. She had spent so much time worrying about what others thought, she had forgotten what she enjoyed. She thought of her small hobbies, her quiet talents, the things that made her feel alive. For the first time tonight, she remembered that she had something unique to offer, something that could not be measured by the clothes she wore or the way she laughed. The night was still long, and she knew there would be more challenges ahead. But sitting there, heart still racing but slowly settling, she felt a tiny spark of courage. Maybe this party wasn't just about appearances and mocking laughter. Maybe it was also about moments like this, unexpected, quiet, and human, where someone noticed her in a way that mattered. And so, with her hands resting on her small bag, she made a small promise to herself. She would survive this evening. She would find her own way to shine. And even if the laughter continued, even if she felt out of place, she would remember that there was more to her than anyone else could ever see at a glance. Because sometimes, the first step to being noticed is simply believing that you deserve to be. She had just started to feel a small sense of calm when she realized she was not as alone as she thought. A few people were watching her, not the kind of friendly, warm attention she had hoped for, but the kind that made her stomach twist. They whispered to each other, casting glances her way. And the way their lips curved into subtle, mocking smiles made her feel exposed. She tried to focus on something else. She looked down at the little plate of food she had picked up earlier, turning a small knepp between her fingers as though it could somehow protect her. She tried to steady her breathing and remind herself that these people didn't know her. Their laughter and their whispers didn't define her worth. But her thoughts were hard to control, her confidence shaky. Then it happened. One of them stepped closer, leaning slightly toward her as if she were part of the entertainment for the evening. "You're not really used to this, are you?" he asked, voice low, but loud enough for a few others to hear. His tone was mocking, playful in the cruel way people sometimes are when they want to feel superior. She felt her cheeks burn. I'm fine," she said quietly, clutching her small bag against her chest. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but somehow it made them laugh louder. "Oh, come on," another said, smirking. "You look like you're about to faint. Do you even know how to enjoy a party?" Her stomach sank. She looked down at her shoes, willing them to make her disappear. She had imagined that attending this party might be a chance to show she could belong, that she could mingle with people who had power and influence, people who could see potential in her. But instead, she was trapped under the weight of their eyes and their laughter. She moved slightly back, trying to create space between herself and them. But the mocking didn't stop. Every word, every chuckle, felt like it was aimed directly at her. "Maybe she should stick to her desk," one whispered, glancing around to see if anyone else agreed. "At least there she doesn't embarrass herself." Her heart raced, and her hands shook slightly. She wanted to tell them to stop, to stand up for herself, but the words wouldn't come. Her throat felt tight, and her voice seemed to have vanished along with her courage. She had always been polite, careful not to make waves. And now that carefulness made her an easy target. She thought about leaving, just quietly slipping out the door, escaping the harsh eyes and sharp laughter. But something inside her resisted. She didn't want this night to end in defeat. She wanted to hold on to the small spark of hope she had felt earlier, feeling that maybe, just maybe, she could be noticed for something meaningful. So she stayed, She tried to find a corner where she could observe without being seen, to remind herself that not all attention was harmful. Her eyes wandered over the room, taking in the glittering decorations, the perfectly arranged tables, the musicians playing softly in the background. The music was soothing, almost like a lifeline, giving her a moment to breathe. But the laughter followed her. She felt it like a shadow, dark and persistent. She could hear whispers every now and then, sharp enough to prick her confidence. She's so awkward. Does she even know what she's doing here? Another voice said. The words were subtle. The sting of them stayed with her. She tried to remind herself that these people were not important to her life. They didn't know her, didn't know her hard work, her late nights, or the little sacrifices she had made to be where she was. They didn't know the passion she carried for the work she loved, yet their judgment felt like a weight pressing on her chest. Her eyes caught movement across the room. Some of the other guests were noticing her discomfort, but no one was intervening. It was as if the air of confidence in the room made people blind to anything that wasn't glamorous or easy. She felt smaller with each passing second, a tiny figure in a vast, glittering world that seemed to have no room for someone like her. A few moments later, one of the mocking group stepped even closer. He smirked and said, "Do you want some help? Maybe I can teach you how to enjoy yourself." The sarcasm in his voice made her stomach churn. She wanted to respond, to say something clever, but her mind was blank. She realized with a sinking feeling that she had become, in that moment, exactly what they wanted her to be: uncomfortable. Uncertain and unsure of herself, she looked down again. Focusing on the food in her hand, it was ridiculous, really, that such a small, harmless gesture holding a canape could make her feel so exposed. She wondered if anyone at this party had ever felt the same way. Surely, at some point, someone as confident as they looked had been in her shoes. Feeling small and out of place, her thoughts raced. Should she leave? Should she try to find someone familiar? Or should she just stand there, silently enduring the mocking until the night was over? She felt trapped, like a bird caught in a cage made of polished smiles and quiet cruelty. Then, almost without realizing it, she noticed someone watching her, not the ones laughing or whispering, but someone standing slightly apart, observing her with calm eyes. There was no smirk, no amusement, just attention. She felt a flicker of curiosity. Who was this person? Why were they looking at her differently? She tried to focus on that gaze, letting it anchor her as much as possible. For a brief moment, the mocking voices faded into the background. She remembered what she had been told about herself. What her manager had said when insisting she'd attend this party: "It's a chance to be seen. Don't let anyone make you feel small." The words came back to her now, steady and strong. Maybe this was what they had meant. Maybe being seen wasn't about blending in, being confident in the same way as everyone else. Maybe it was about showing up, even when it was uncomfortable. Even when people laughed. Her hands unclutched from her small bag, and she straightened her back, trying to lift the weight of embarrassment from her shoulders. She took a slow breath, letting the music fill her ears and steady her racing heart. She felt a small sense of strength returning, fragile but real. The mocking group continued to whisper, but she tried to let it roll off her like water. They didn't know her. They didn't know what she was capable of. And perhaps, just perhaps, their laughter would not define her night. She glanced again toward the person who had been observing her. He offered a small, encouraging nod, and for a moment she felt almost seen, not just as a figure in the room, but as a real person with fears, hopes, and talents. That simple acknowledgement sparked a flicker of courage inside her. She realized then that the rest of the evening might still be difficult. There would still be laughter, still whispers, still people who judged without understanding. But she had learned something important. She didn't have to shrink. She could hold her place in that room, even if it felt like everyone else was larger and louder, and so. With that thought, she straightened a little more. She held her head high, even as the mocking continued, even as her hands still trembled slightly. She reminded herself that her value wasn't determined by the cruel amusement of strangers, but by who she was. Quietly and fully, in every small, unremarkable moment, the night stretched ahead, glittering and intimidating, but she felt a tiny spark of resilience. She would survive this part, endure this discomfort, perhaps even find a moment of her own to shine, because sometimes being strong isn't about stopping the laughter or silencing the whispers. It's about standing tall, even when it feels impossible, and waiting for the moment when the world finally notices what you've always known about yourself. She sat on the bench, her fingers still tightly gripping her small bag, and tried to calm her racing heart. The mocking voices were still in the background, faint but persistent, like a storm cloud she could not escape. She thought about leaving, about slipping out into the quiet night, and forgetting the embarrassment she had just endured. But something kept her rooted in place. Something told her that leaving now would be letting them win. Then she noticed him again. The man who had been watching her from across the room. He moved slowly through the crowd, but unlike the others, he didn't laugh or whisper. There was a quiet focus in his eyes, a kind of attention that didn't demand anything from her except to be herself. She felt a strange mixture of relief and nervousness. Why was he looking at her this way? Did he see what the others couldn't? He stopped a few feet away and smiled, not the polite smile of someone making small talk, but a warm, genuine smile that made her feel oddly safe. "Do you play the piano?" he asked. She blinked, caught off guard. Her mind raced. Did he mean as a hobby? Or did he mean professionally? She wasn't sure how to answer. For a moment, she thought about saying no. She thought about all the ways she could hide, all the ways she could shrink further into herself to avoid attention. But then she remembered her piano at home, the way her fingers danced across the keys, the way the music seemed to flow through her like breathing. It was a part of her that no one at this party could mock, a part that belonged entirely to her. "I do," she said softly, her voice barely audible at first. She hadn't realized she was speaking until she heard herself. The words felt strange but freeing. He nodded as if he had expected her answer, and gestured toward the corner of the room where a grand piano stood. Its polished black surface gleamed under the soft lights, and the lid was slightly raised, as if inviting her. "Would you like to play?" he asked. There was no pressure in his voice, no hidden expectations. Just a simple question, a simple offer. Her heart leaped. She hadn't expected anyone to notice her talent tonight, let alone offer her a chance to share it. Her hands trembled as she rose from the bench. Every step toward the piano felt heavy with anticipation. The room seemed to shift slightly around her, the music in the background fading into the hum of her own thoughts. Could she really do this? Could she stand in front of all these people and play, knowing that many of them had just laughed at her? She took a deep breath and sat down on the bench in front of the piano. The polished keys gleamed under the lights, smooth and inviting. She placed her fingers lightly on them, almost afraid to touch. And then she remembered the first time she had played. Alone in her small apartment, the way the music had felt like it was lifting her off the ground. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the memory fill her. Her fingers moved tentatively at first, finding the notes she knew so well. Slowly, the music began to flow, delicate and soft, like water trickling over stones. She felt the tension in her body ease slightly with each note. The mocking voices that had haunted her for the past hour faded into silence. Replaced by the music she was creating, she opened her eyes and looked around. The room had gone quiet. People had stopped talking, some even turning toward her, drawn by the unexpected melody. She felt a flicker of surprise. They weren't laughing anymore. They were listening. And in that moment, she realized that her music had power in a way she hadn't felt before. It didn't matter what anyone else thought, this was hers. And she was sharing it with the world. The man who had invited her to play watched her closely, his eyes reflecting pride and encouragement. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt. He simply let her play, allowing her to take the spotlight in a way that was gentle and respectful. That quiet support gave her courage, and she began to play with more confidence. Letting her emotions pour through every note, the music swelled, filling the room with warmth and feeling. She played with everything she had, every ounce of anxiety and fear transformed into sound. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, yet there was a rawness to it. a vulnerability that made the performance deeply human. People around her shifted in their seats, some leaning forward, captivated. She could feel their attention like a physical presence, and for the first time tonight, she felt seen, not mocked, not whispered about, but truly noticed. She noticed the expressions on the faces around her. Some looked surprised, as if they hadn't expected her to have talent. Others smiled, genuinely moved by the music. And those who had laughed earlier? She caught glimpses of their astonishment, some even shifting uncomfortably, as if realizing how wrong they had been to mock her. The piano became her shield and her voice. With every note, she grew more confident. The fear that had plagued her all night was replaced with a sense of purpose. She wasn't just performing. She was telling her story without words, letting the music speak for her in a way she hadn't thought possible. She didn't know how long she had been playing when she finally lifted her hands from the keys. The room was silent for a moment, as if holding its breath. Then came the applause, soft at first, then growing louder, sincere, and full of warmth. Her heart raced, a mixture of relief and pride coursing through her. The man who had first spoken to her approached again. "That was remarkable," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You have a gift. Thank you for sharing it." She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a sense of validation that she hadn't experienced all night. She had been mocked, made to feel small, and yet here she was. And her talent had spoken louder than their laughter ever could. She realized something important in that moment. The mocking had not defined her. The judgment of others had no power over what she could do, what she could create, what she could give to the world. The piano had become her voice, proof that she was more than anyone's whispers or cruel amusement. As the applause settled, she looked around the room. People were still watching her, but now it was with curiosity and respect. Some even approached her, smiling, asking questions about her playing. The mocking group had retreated, their confidence shaken, replaced by a quiet recognition of her talent. She felt a small thrill of triumph. Not the kind that came from revenge or superiority, but a deeper, quieter victory. The kind that comes from being true to yourself, even when others doubt you. She had faced ridicule, had felt the sting of humiliation, and had chosen to respond not with anger or defensiveness, but with her own strength. Her own gift. The man who had guided her to the piano gave her a final nod. There was pride in his eyes, yes, but also something more, a recognition that she had stepped into her own light, that she had taken control of the narrative for the first time that night. And in that recognition, she felt a connection. A small but powerful reminder that sometimes all it takes is for one person to notice your potential to change everything. She stood up from the piano. Her legs a little shaky, but her heart steady. The music had ended, but the feeling it left lingered, warming her from the inside out. She realized that tonight had changed her, had shifted something deep inside. She wasn't just a nervous guest at a party anymore. She was someone who could rise above mockery, someone whose talents could speak louder than the harshest judgment. As she walked back toward the crowd, she felt a new sense of confidence. The laughter that had tormented her earlier no longer mattered. She held her head high, aware that she had proven something not only to the people in the room but to herself. She had found her voice in the quiet, unexpected way that only true talent can create, and she knew that this was only the beginning. Tonight had shown her that when opportunity meets courage, even the smallest act, a single melody, a single choice to step forward can change the way the world sees you. For the first time that evening, she smiled freely, fully, and without hesitation. She had been mocked. Yes. She had felt small. But in that moment, standing tall and human in the glow of her own music, she understood something vital. Sometimes the world notices you most when you are brave enough to show who you really are. She stayed at the piano for a moment, letting the applause settle around her. It was different from anything she had expected tonight. The laughter, the whispers, the judgment they had, all disappeared, replaced by a quiet, almost tangible respect. People were looking at her differently now, not with amusement, not with sneers, but with curiosity and admiration. She felt a strange mixture of relief, pride, and disbelief. Could one performance really change how people saw her? She lifted her hands again, almost instinctively, feeling the smooth keys under her fingers. The music began to flow once more, this time with a kind of confidence she hadn't felt in hours. She played slowly at first, testing the waters, feeling the rhythm of the room as she did. Her nerves were still there, but they had shifted into something stronger: determination. She wasn't playing for anyone's approval anymore. She was playing for herself, and somehow that made the music even more powerful. The room began to quiet further. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. People turned toward the piano, drawn in by the melody. The mockers who had made her feel so small were now still, their eyes wide, almost afraid to interrupt the beauty of what they were hearing. For the first time, she realized that the power of her music was greater than the fear that had held her back all night. Her fingers danced over the keys, weaving emotion into every note. She could feel the energy of the room shifting, like a tide moving quietly but surely. People who had been talking amongst themselves now stood in silence, watching, listening. She noticed a few of the executives who had mocked her earlier exchanged glances, their confidence faltering as the truth became impossible to ignore. She had talent, skill, and courage in abundance. The music grew, sweeping across the room like a wave. It was soft, yet commanding, gentle, yet insistent. With each note, she felt more connected, not just to the piano, but to everyone in the room. The laughter and ridicule from earlier felt like a distant memory, a shadow she had stepped out of. She realized that in this moment, she wasn't just performing. She was telling a story, one that didn't require words. She was sharing herself. People were listening. She glanced briefly at the man who had noticed her at the beginning, the one who had asked if she played the piano. He was watching her with a quiet smile, nodding slightly as if to say, "This is your moment. Take it." His calm presence gave her confidence, but she realized the strength wasn't coming from him. It was coming from her. It had been there all along, waiting for a chance to emerge. As the music continued, she noticed more faces in the crowd. Some were smiling, genuinely moved by the emotion she was putting into her playing. Others looked almost stunned, realizing they had underestimated her. Even the people who had laughed before now seemed hesitant, unsure of how to react. Their smirks were gone, placed by something she hadn't seen on their faces all night: respect. For the first time, she understood something she hadn't grasped before. Talent and courage can change the way people see you. But more importantly, showing up fully and honestly can transform how they feel. They weren't just watching her play. They were experiencing a part of her, something real and human. And in return, she felt seen in a way that went beyond the superficial judgments of a party. She allowed herself to close her eyes for a moment, letting the music carry her. Each note was a release, a small act of courage made tangible. She remembered the fear she had felt when she first entered the room, the embarrassment, the mocking voices that had made her want to vanish. And now, all of that felt distant, almost insignificant. She had found a way to rise above it. And the transformation was visible not only to herself, but to everyone around her. The melody shifted. It's becoming more intricate, more expressive. She felt the rhythm in her bones, the subtle movements of her body in sync with the music. It was like dancing without moving her feet, a fluid expression of emotion that touched the audience deeply. Some of the guests leaned forward slightly, as if trying to absorb every detail, every nuance. Their attention was complete, their admiration quiet but unmistakable. She noticed the group who had mocked her earlier standing together, clearly uncomfortable now. Their expressions had changed from amusement to awe. She could see the realization dawn in their eyes. They had judged too quickly, underestimated her, and now they were confronted with undeniable evidence of her talent and resilience. It was a subtle shift, but it mattered. She felt a quiet satisfaction, not vindictive, not cruel, but deeply human. She had earned this moment honestly. A few guests approached as she played, standing just a few steps away. Their expressions were a mixture of surprise and admiration. One whispered something to another, and both nodded, eyes still fixed on her hands. She didn't need to hear the words. She could feel the change in the atmosphere. The room had transformed from a place of judgment ridicule to one of respect and genuine attention. The music slowed slightly, becoming more introspective. She felt the room hold its breath along with her, as if waiting for her next move. Her fingers glided over the keys, playing with softness and care, letting each note resonate. It was no longer about proving anything. It was about sharing a part of herself that had remained hidden, a part that was strong, sensitive, and human. As she reached the final notes, she felt a rush of emotion. Relief, pride, and joy all mingled in her chest. She lifted her hands from the keys slowly, savoring the last vibrations. The silence in the room lasted for a heartbeat, and then the applause began slowly at first, then growing louder and more heartfelt with every clap. She felt the warmth of it surround her, a blanket of validation that no mockery could penetrate. The man who had invited her to play stepped closer, clapping with genuine appreciation. "That was extraordinary," he said. "Thank you for sharing your talent with us." His words were simple, but they carried weight. For the first time tonight, she felt fully acknowledged. Her value recognized not by status or wealth, but by her own courage and skill. She looked around again. People were approaching, offering smiles, compliments, and words of encouragement. Even those who had laughed before seemed hesitant, their previous judgment replaced by a newfound respect. She realized that her performance had shifted something in the room. What had begun as a night of anxiety and mockery had become a night of admiration and connection. She felt a subtle, profound change in herself. The fear and self-doubt that had plagued her earlier were replaced by a quiet confidence. She understood now that her worth wasn't defined by the opinions of others, and that even in the face of ridicule, she had the power to transform the situation through authenticity and talent. The applause continued, and she allowed herself to smile fully, freely, without hesitation. This smile was different from the polite, nervous ones she had offered earlier. It was a smile born of courage, of achievement, of a quiet triumph that was entirely her own. She had taken a moment meant for judgment and turned it into an opportunity to shine. As she stepped away from the piano, she felt lighter, freer, as if the weight of the night had lifted. People continued to talk among themselves, but now their conversations were tinged with admiration and curiosity. She had changed the energy of the room, and in doing so, she had changed the way people would remember her. She realized something else too. The piano, the music, the applause, they were not just symbols of her talent, they were symbols of resilience, of stepping forward when it felt impossible, of trusting herself even when the world seemed against her. She had faced ridicule. She had felt small, and yet here she was, standing tall, human and unshakable in her authenticity. The man who had guided her toward the piano gave her one last nod. She returned it with a quiet smile, a shared understanding passing between them. No words were needed. He had given her the chance, but she had taken it and made it her own. That was what mattered, as she moved back into the crowd. She noticed a few guests approaching her, asking questions about her playing, complimenting her technique, and sharing their own experiences with music. She felt connected, seen, and valued in a way that had nothing to do with wealth, status, or appearances. It was a human connection, pure and simple, and it felt stronger than anything she had expected from this night. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly enjoy the party. Not because she was trying to fit in, not because she wanted to impress anyone, but because she had found her place in the room, her voice, and her moment. The fear that had weighed on her earlier had been replaced with confidence, and the judgment of others no longer held power over her. She realized that this was more than just a performance. It was a transformation. The same room that had felt intimidating and cruel earlier now felt warm and full of possibility. She understood deeply and clearly that she had the ability to shape her own narrative, to find her light even in a space designed to intimidate, and in that understanding, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had been mocked, she had been uncertain, and she had faced fear, but she had also discovered courage, talent, and resilience. Tonight had shown her what she was capable of, and she knew that this moment, this small but powerful victory, would stay with her long after the party ended.